Today we talk about lighting. There are a few scenes that are available in classic content that I think are definitely worth taking a look at, and you may have already seen them in Chris's class, I don't know. One of them involves translucency. Have you guys seen that one, where the cow is behind the screen so you can see what it looks like? There's also another one where there's a stained glass window. And one of the things that you might want to do is it transfers color. So if you have a light that goes through a transparent object, you know, with a stained glass window, that on the floor you would see that the light would actually use that window kind of as a projector, and it would project the image of the stained glass window on the ground. It wouldn't be just a shadow, it would be, you would see that image on the ground. Well, that you can do too. And there is a scene in here that you can use and turn on and see how they did it, and we're going to look that over. There are some other features as well that I want to cover with lighting too, to show you all the different kinds of lights, to show you the different kinds of shadows that each of the lights cast. With spotlights, there's also something that's unique that David, you said that Chris had shown you, is that you can use spotlights as projectors. You can take an image and you can project from a spotlight onto a surface. It's no different than that. What that's doing. It's taking and it's projecting something onto a surface. And that can be really pretty nifty too. That can be used for a number of things. You can create, if you just want to create an interesting look of having this ambiance, this image projected over everything or on a single object, it can be pretty nifty. The other thing that it can do too is that, let's say you want to create the illusion that the light is coming through a window or the light is coming through some Venetian blinds. Are you going to build the Venetian blinds, and are you going to then turn around and have a light behind it and project the light through the Venetian blinds to cast the shadow? That takes a bit of work. You can actually use an image in the spotlight and then project light through that image, and it will create the same illusion. And it goes much quicker. So there's those facets of lighting that I want to talk about, of just the technical components. The other thing about lighting is too, and I don't know how much Chris has said about this, is that you can't underestimate the importance of lighting in your scenes, even for a single object. The tendency for many people is to overlight their scene. And when you overlight a scene, it tends to bleach everything out. And when it bleaches everything out, everything looks two-dimensional. Think of it this way. What looks more dramatic? Looking at a landscape on a hot summer day at noon, where the light is directly overhead and is extremely intense and there are no shadows, or maybe in the fall or even during the summer, it could be early morning, late afternoon, where the sun is setting and you see these beautiful cast shadows, a little bit underlit, you know, a little bit more dim. Colors seem richer, everything seems a little bit more vibrant, things look more three-dimensional. Okay? I would choose the morning or afternoon scene. The midday scene doesn't look that good. It's not, I mean, it is what it is, but from an aesthetic point of view, it's something that you would want to fix. It just doesn't look that good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into scenes here, and let's start with some of these and see if I can't find some of them. Where some of them are just weird. It's not under, and I can't remember half the time where they put them. Benchmark. I don't think it's under here. It could be blotchy. Light stage. Light stage. I will show you the light stage too at the very end. Please remind me to show you that. The light stage is an interesting, they have it already set up with a variety of different kind of lights in this light, in this bowl, so it doesn't cast shadows in corners. You know how when you're in a room, You have the corners, the corner and the edges where the floor meets the walls. Those can be a distraction. You may have seen in television where they have these coved corners where there is no joint between the wall and the floor, where it's curved, and it gives you this indeterminate depth so that it doesn't detract from what's in the foreground or what you're focusing on. Well, that's what this does, and the lighting is really pretty ideal, and it works very nicely. So I want to show you that as well. Okay, let's look up setup. It's not here, so let's have a tutorial. Let's look here, because I know that there are some. Color filter. Let's start by opening that scene. I know that there are some in here. This is the one that I was talking about with regard to, you'll see in a minute, okay, if I find everything. Okay, let's go back to objects. I hate this about Lightwave, but you know, it's a good program. It's not the end of the world. Let's go back to Lightwave 8. Let's go back to content. Let's look at classic content. Let's go to objects. Let's go into stained glass window. So maybe that would also be if there's a tutorial folder. Is there? Yeah. Is it in here? Spray bottle. In lighting? Could it be there? Lion statue? No. Okay, where did they put it? Stained glass window. Space setup. Oh man. I hate it when they do this. I hate it, I hate it, I hate it. Now it's going to take me longer. Household, no. Structures, lightwave object, texture examples. How about stained glass? Oh, come on. Weather, weapons, video effect, vehicles, urban. No, I encourage, as I'm groping my way through here, I encourage you to look at a lot of these objects, look at a lot of these scenes, and deconstruct them when you have the time. It is household? Thank you. Okay. So it is in here, stained glass. Thank you very much. There we go. So let's go ahead and find that. It should find everything else. Boom. There we go. So what I need to do first is I'm going to bring up my surface editor, because this will be important in here. And I'm going to select the window. And you'll see that the window has an image of stained glass in here. Do you see that in the little ball? So let me go ahead and do, let's switch to render first. Let's go to render options. Let's check here to make sure that ray trace reflection and ray trace transparency, because we're dealing with a window. Ray trace refraction, we're good. We want image viewer, that's good. Let's go ahead and render the frame and see what we get. Okay, so here we see, and this is a good example of transferring color here. Is it all done? It's done. So where is my, I thought I had it. Oh, come on. It's render options. I have image viewer. So why isn't it showing up? Let's render again, render frame. Maybe it wasn't done. I want you to see a little bit larger view of this. There we go. I just didn't wait long enough. So you'll notice here is our image of stained glass, and this is something that you could grab from a photograph. It's something that you could create in Illustrator, or you could create in Photoshop. It doesn't matter. But you'll notice that on the ground is an image of that stained glass window. And it's transferred because if we take a look at our scene here, and I switch from camera view to perspective view, and now I spin this around, notice behind here we have a light in front, but we also have a light in back. So this light shines through the window and it transfers the color of the stained glass window onto the floor. Well, where do you do that? Where do you change the setting? And it's a very simple setting, but you do have to remember to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you here, if we go back to advanced and we look at, I don't want glow, we have color filter right here. In advanced, it's set to 100%. So if you forget where it is, just remember it's under one of these tabs, and it's by default this is set to 0. So I'm going to go ahead and dial this back to 0. So my color filter is set to 0. And we're going to go back again and we're going to render it, and let's watch what happens now by turning that feature off, just to let you know what it is. Notice that the light transfers through the window. The light is projected on the floor, but the color from the window isn't transferred. So it's assigned to the surface texture itself, and it's just a simple button, dial that you change there. Slide. Frame completed. Okay, it's over here. So you can see a little bit better what's going on here. See the difference? Not quite, not as interesting, not as realistic. And it's just a simple setting that we go back here under the surface editor. Notice I selected the window, and where we have here, it's color filter. And by default, it's set to 0. Turn it up as high or low as you want. It takes care of it for you. You just have to make sure that you have a light behind it to project through it so that it casts the image onto some sort of surface. And that will add believability, realism to it. Very easy to do. I mean, a lot of these are easy to do if you can remember where the heck they put them. I mean, it's hard to remember all of them. At least it is for me.
Work with any light, or do we have to do anything in particular?
You don't have to do anything, no particular light, any kind of light, spotlight, distant light, doesn't matter. Any kind of light will work through that because the filter is applied to the surface texture, but it does relate to lighting, so that's why I show that to you here. Okay? So everybody got that? This can be, little things like this that don't take a lot of work that can really enhance your project enormously. It's like, oh wow, it adds this degree of realism, this kind of a wow factor that just doesn't take much but can really enhance your piece quite a bit. So it's something to think about. Okay, so let me go ahead and clear the scene. Go File. And let's open another one. Let's go to File, Load Scene. And I'm going to go back again. It should still be in Tutorial Scenes, so let's look in here again. Trying to find translucency. This is the one that I want. Boom. Okay, don't look. Be careful. Okay, so we have, looks like a Japanese screen. And you will see here, you notice behind here, here's a light. It's back here. And there's also a front light, but there is a back light as well. Now, and this demonstrates the difference between transparency and translucency. In the last example, the glass is somewhat transparent. Not totally, but it is somewhat transparent. This is translucent. You cannot see through it, but it allows light to pass through it. Shades like this, the lampshade that we did, other, useful examples. So that's perspective view. Let's go back to camera view to see what we have here. Doesn't look like anything special, but I'm going to go back over to my surface editor, and I'm going to select the paper blinds, the frame, and I'm going to look at basic, and let's look at translucency here. Right now it's set to 0. So let's go ahead and do a test render of this. Render frame and see what we get. Notice that the cow behind it, we see the shadow of it. So how does that work? And this, given the situation, a specific situation will be something that you'll need. So this is complete. We're done. Okay, where did it go? Come out, wherever you are. There we go. Notice the cow behind it. Where is the cow? What is the cow? Is it a picture of a cow? No, it's not. It is an actual 3D modeled cow. So we're going to switch from camera view back to perspective view, and let's spin it around, and there's our cow behind it. Notice that there is a light, a spotlight projected through it. So how do you get that effect? We come back here. The frame has no translucency, which is what you want, but we look at the paper, and it has 50% translucency. Let's do the same that we did with the color, and let's turn that to 0. So again, if you want, you can add translucency. It will look darker, but when we go back to the camera view and we render the frame, notice a difference. You don't see the cow. Now, if I were to make it transparent, you would see the cow, but you would not see the shadow of the cow. Does that make sense? It's like I can see the people through that window because that's transparent. If it were a paper screen where I had shades over that and there were light, the light was on in there and it shined through, I would see, as I did before, I would see the shadow of the people, see the shadows of what was through it. That's translucency. So again, it's a simple setting, and it's done with, it has to do with lighting, but it's not done with the lights themselves. You can use whatever light you want. Make sure you just select the surface, and we can go ahead and you can use a texture or translucent map if you want, or we can go ahead and turn it back up as they did to 50, 60. I'm going to crank it up to 100% and see what happens. Let's go ahead and render the frame again and see what happens. Now notice you really see, quite prominently the shadow of the cow that's being cast on the blinds behind it. And this is, what happens in the real world, and it's recreating that for you. Okay? So this is something that you had seen before or hadn't, or did Chris show you this? He did show you this one. How about the color transfer? Did he show you that one too? Stained glass? No? It doesn't hurt to see it again. If this is boring for everybody, I'll stop. I already have it. Huh?
I like seeing it.
Okay. Well, it's nice to remember it because it's when you're, as I say, when you're building your objects, you should be thinking about, especially when you're building them, you have to look carefully at the structure. Say, okay, look at proportions and get those right first, general proportions. And then as you get the general proportions right, then you look at more specific details. And you look, for example, for this monitor. Does it come to abrupt, really sharp edge, or do you see these little subtle fillets, these little rounded corners? And those become important because they catch light. They give you a nice little highlight along the edge. It adds realism to it, believability. If you want a stylized look, then you don't use it. And then once you get your model built, and you start to apply surfaces, realistic surface, it's the same thing. You look at it, and I've used this example before. Okay, I want a wood surface. What kind of wood surface? Is it one that where I can use procedurals and it's kind of a computer generated looking wood, or I do want it to look like real wood, really believable wood. If I want it to look like real believable wood, I need a photo image of that wood. Then I have to ask myself, okay, is this smooth, highly polished, varnished, reflective wood? Or is it sort of a dull, matte wood, but smooth? Or is it rough hewn? It's been weathered, by the ocean. I found it at the beach, and I see the grain all gnarly and three-dimensional and stuff. You have to look at all those things, and it's definitely a very matte finish. Then you have to start to adjust your surfaces accordingly to make it look like that and make it look really believable. And the more details and the more observations you make, the more believable everything will be. And that, for the moment, that is the goal. Although later on in the semester, I will show you how you can apply a shader to objects that will make it look posterized, 2D. And it really is pretty neat. How many people in here, for example, are anime fans? A few people like anime? Okay. Not all, but a lot of how anime is done is not by traditional 2D animation, but it's 3D. And how you get this stylized 2D look is the way it's rendered in the computer. And it can give you a highly stylized 2D look, and it takes you no work at all, whereas to actually draw those, you know, characters like that and scenes would take a lot of work. It's really pretty nifty. And so it's things like that I want to show you, that at the right place at the right time, these tools can be very effective. And there's a gazillion tools, lots of bells and whistles that in this class we don't even have time to cover. But these, I think, you'll find from time to time that you'll use. Okay. So the other one I wanted to now go ahead, and I'm going to go ahead and clear the scene again. And I'm going to go back to Modeler, and I made this little still life here. You know, just very simple, basic. And it's all saved, and I'm going to send it to layout. And let's look at this from the camera view. So let's look from perspective to camera. And I'm going to move the camera in. Whoops, I don't want to do that. Let's go ahead and make sure the camera is selected. And right now, I just have a default light. This is the light that you see here, okay? And this happens to be, who can tell me, since you guys have seen this before? By default, what light are you given? Distant light. And what is a distant light? What does it represent, or what kind of light? Exactly. It's like the sun. It's a big wall of light. So notice that as I move this to the left and to the right in here, notice how these objects are lighted. It doesn't change it, does it? It would be the same as having the, I mean, look at how big the sun is relative to the earth. You know, you can walk around a lot and it really doesn't change your shadow. That's a huge light source, and that's really what this represents. And it works well in many instances, but in some instances, maybe you want to do something different or use something in addition to that. It really depends on what your goal is. So let's start with this, just to do a simple rendering and to show you what happens. So I'm going to go ahead and render frame. And is it all done? It's all done. So let's go ahead. Let's bring this over. Okay, so what's it missing? If you've ever had a drawing class, one of the most important things that you learn about when you're drawing, to make things look three-dimensional, and I don't know if your art teachers have told you this, but I remember when I was in art school that they did, that they do two things to make your still life look three-dimensional. So what's missing? Shadows. That's it. Shadows are missing. Shadows do two things. They will anchor the objects to the surface. That's number one. And that makes it look more three-dimensional. It gives it a spatial appearance. The second thing is that when shadows fall across other forms, they help make that form look more three-dimensional. So if I'm holding one arm like this and another one here, and the light is streaming from my left, your right, and my hand and arm cast a shadow on this arm or on my leg, the shadow will, just by drawing it, it will wrap around the form, and the appearance of that shadow, it's kind of like a belt around your waist. It makes it, just by drawing that, it makes it look more three-dimensional. It makes it look rounded. It makes it look more cylindrical. So one of the first things that you have to remember to do when you render is that you go to Render Options. and make sure that you turn on ray trace shadows. That might be all that we need right now. And later on, I mean, I turn all these on by default, just that you don't necessarily need them. It doesn't take really that much render time for what we're doing. That if I have anything transparent, I want to make sure that it's rendered transparent. If I have reflections, I want to make sure that they appear. But when you're doing preliminary renderings, maybe you want some of them turned off, so it takes less time. Okay, so remember to turn that on. So let's go ahead and render this again. Notice the difference. Look all right. I mean, you see it slightly how these have, but notice how the shadow from the cube, how it arcs around the cone. And that little arc here gives you a sense that this is cylindrical at the base, that it's, okay. It's subtle, but if we were to do more of this and have maybe the cone cast a shadow on the sphere and so on, you would get the same feeling. Okay? So that makes, just shadows by themselves make a huge, huge difference. Okay? So let me go ahead and move this, and let's start to move our lights around, change lights, and I want you to see what each of them does a little bit differently. I'm going to make sure that I go ahead and select camera. I'm going to hit T for move. I'm going to move this forward so we can see this a little bit nicer. I'm going to go ahead and move this up a little bit. I'm going to hit Y for rotate, come down so we can see the tops a little bit better. Maybe I will go ahead and move this. So I try to have this cast a shadow on here. And let's render this again and see what we get. There we go. This, I think, is a better example. Notice how the shadow from the cube onto the cone, and especially the cone onto the sphere, notice how it curves. And just that simple curve gives you a sense of three-dimensional, you know, that it is three-dimensional, that it is spherical. Important how you set these things up. Okay. Let's try some other lights and see what we get here. I'm going to go ahead and move this back a little bit. Just a little bit nicer composition here. And let's try some different lights. So to do that, we have, if I select lights, okay, and you can have as many lights as you want. Typically you need a minimum 2, oftentimes 3 lights in a scene. You'll have your main light, you'll have your secondary light, and you'll have a third fill light. Isn't that what Chris taught you guys? Okay. Depends. If you're doing an outdoor scene, you might have just a single distant light and that's it. On the other hand, you can play with lighting. And one of the things that I will show you in a minute is that we can have multiple lights. And if you had an outdoor scene, if you had multiple lights, what would occur? What would you get? Multiple shadows. Well, that wouldn't look very realistic, would it? So what we can do is we can have it light the objects, but we can have it turn off the shadows for that. Did Chris show you guys that too? Yeah, where you can turn shadows off. You don't need, it can illuminate the area, but it won't cast shadows. You can also have it have it selectively light certain objects and not others as well. And to do that, we make sure that we have lights selected and we select light properties. Okay, so it tells us, when we look at light properties, it gives us a lot of really important information here we can go through. First is, if we had multiple lights, we could adjust them all from here. It gives us the light color, and by default they give us a white light. It also gives us the intensity of the light, and by default it's 100%. And that can be adjusted. If we want to dim it and make it more subdued, we can do that. If you want to make it look like an evening scene, we can change the color of it so that maybe it's a bluer light, so it looks like, you know, it's being illuminated by a full moon or something like that. You change the color. The other thing that you can do right now is that there is no fall off. You can have fall off. And that would be equivalent, I believe, to the lumens that the light has. It can be really intense, but it would not be, I guess in a crude way, that powerful. Case in point, 3 examples. We were on a football field, and I'm at one goal, you're at another, and I'm holding a little birthday candle at night, okay, and you're at the other end. You could see that would be a full, intense birthday candle, but at the other end you would see that light, but it would not illuminate much around it, would it? It's not that intense. I mean, it's full intensity, but there isn't that, it's not that powerful, correct? So that would be something that you could control by fall off. That if you applied fall off, it would only illuminate just a little bit of area around it. Same way that we used fall off to control the bends in our reboot character. Okay? You control how much, how it, close to the light, very intense, illuminates everything, and as you move away from the light, it has little effect or impact on it. You see it, but it doesn't affect the objects around it. Second example would be a flashlight. Okay? Not much bigger than a candle, but again, from 100 yards away, the objects around it, it's more, they're both could be set at 100% intensity, very bright, but it has more lumens, it has more power, so it's going to illuminate more of it, of the area around it. And then I guess the third example would be use one of those huge spotlights that they use for lighting up the stadiums at night. Just hugely powerful, has almost no fall off at all. Because when you put these lights in here, I can scale the light, but that doesn't do anything. It just makes the image of it, the little icon of it in here bigger. It doesn't affect the intensity. It doesn't affect the fall off. It doesn't do any of those things. Okay? And as everybody noticed, by default, it's given a distant light. Notice the other light types. We have a point light. A point light is similar to an incandescent bulb. It's a ball of light that radiates in every direction. Okay? Next one is a spotlight, or as I like to think of it, a cone of light. It has a single source and it goes out, but then you see it as a cone. Okay? There are things that you can do with spotlights that you can't do with these other lights that are pretty cool. The next is a linear light. A linear light is similar to a fluorescent light. It happens to be an array, meaning 4 point lights in a row. And it gives you softer shadows. It's a little bit more subtle. It can be very effective. And then the last one is an area light. An area light is an array of linear lights. There are 4 linear lights. So it's almost, and you may have seen this if you've ever seen shots of photographers when they're lighting in a very controlled stage situation and they want a nice soft light that bathes over the car or a product that they're shooting. And you get these beautiful soft shadows, nice soft even light, not harsh. That's what you would use for that. And it might be a combination of these lights too. And when we look at that stage, light stage, with the lighting in there, you'll see the combination of lights that they used to create a nice even lighting, and it would enhance a product if you put it in there and make everything work really nicely. The distant, one thing to let you know, the more lights that you add and the more shadows you have, that sort of thing for the computer to calibrate, the longer rendering time it will take. That's another thing. Distant or area lights take much longer to render than distant lights, as an example. So think about those things too. Just be aware of it. Not make your choices, well, I want to hurry up and render it, so I'm going to switch my lights, but just be prepared for that additional time. and it can add an appreciable amount of time to the rendering. Let's switch from distant to point light and just go through each one of these and render them, and the light will be in the same location. And notice, and again, it's at 100 distance, fall off is intensity is off. We can also change that so you can see what it does. And I'm going to go ahead and render it again and see, just go through each one and see the difference. Notice the difference in the shadows. Notice the difference in how the objects are illuminated, so on and so forth. So let's go ahead and render this one. Let's take that. And let's go back to the layer and let's switch back to 8. Notice how it's not as intense as a distant light. Notice the shift. Both at 100%, no fall off, but look at the difference. Okay. Let's try the next one. That's point light. Let's try spotlight. And this will really be different. Let's go ahead and render again. See what I'm talking about? A cone of light. Now, spotlights are unique. We can use them as projection. We can project images from them. We can also use volumetric lighting. I think to use an example, if you've ever seen light streaming through a window and you'll see particles, or so that it actually has, it looks like it has a volume or a presence. You may also notice at night street lamps, there's a little bit of moisture in the air, and you see, you know, as the street lamps, you know, project and illuminate cars underneath and the streets and that sort of thing, you see that cone, you see that area around it. That's volumetric lighting. You can add that. You also see that with spotlights in the theater. You know, especially in smoke-filled rooms and that sort of thing, you see the light because the particles of the smoke and stuff are being illuminated by it, and that gives it volume. So we can add that. Another thing that we can do with this too is that we can control the soft edge. You can give it a really hard edge. So let me go ahead and give it an absolute hard edge and render it again so you can see what I'm talking about. Notice how this little ring around here becomes absolutely crisp. Or we can soften it. We can go back and we add the soft edge. By default, it's set to 5 degrees. Let's crank it up to 30 degrees, and you'll notice how soft this edge is around here. Let's render it again. See how soft this is around here? The shadows that are cast from the objects by the light remain hard-edged, but that ring, or from the edge of the cone of the light, can be as hard or soft as you like. Okay? Now notice, too, how limited the objects are, I mean how visible they are from that cone. So how would you control that? It's not as evenly, the light is not as evenly dispersed. How do you know how to point the light at something? Well, one of the things that we can do is we can come back with lights, make sure that the light is selected, and we have something, instead of camera view, we have light view. Did Chris show you this as well? Yeah. So now what we can do is we can move the light up, we can move it down, and if we want it directed at a specific object, it's much easier to move and to point here. If I want it pointed at just the cube and nothing else, let the rest fall off, you know, I can hit Y for rotate, and I can have it illuminate, you know, mostly the cube here. And if I want to hit T for move, I can go ahead and I can move the light back. I can hold down the command key and I can pull it down, and I can go ahead and hit Y again. So I'm looking through the light as if I were looking through the camera. Make it much easier to direct your lights, as if you were a lighting specialist in the theater and you're back there with a spotlight, you know, and you're at that point and you can see where it's headed, it's directed. You can get a general view if you were to switch from light view to top view or something so you get a general sense of direction. But to really see how it's going to illuminate everything, you would want to probably do that. Look through the light. So notice how I'm changing this. It has a really very different effect. I mean, you can dramatically change that. Okay? Now, I mentioned you can also project images. So let's go ahead and project something and see what it does with that. Again, let's select lights. Let's look at light properties. We come down here and it says projection image. It says none. I'm going to load image. And I'm going to go inside here, inside my desktop, and I'm just going to pick an image that I have. Let's pick the one that we were using, excuse me, that we're using as a template for Mike. We go ahead and open that up. Okay. Now, watch what happens. I hope I did this correct. Let's see what happens here. Let's go back. I don't want to see light view. I'm going to look at camera view. And let's go ahead and render the frame again and see what it does. See how the image is projected on everything? It can have a really dramatic effect. Just something as simple as that. Now watch if we add, and it's the only light that allows you to do that. Let's go back now and add volumetric lighting. And I'm just going to use the default settings. It's something that you would want to tweak. If you go back into volumetric lighting options, you can fade, fog in, effective dissolve. We can set this maybe to 50%. And so I said default settings and I'm not. Opacity, cast, shadows, you can do that if you want. I'm just going to leave this as is. Close these. And let's render this again. And it's every time I change these settings, it's going to add properties to this. Now notice how the light actually has volume or has dimension by me doing that. It's it's similar to, I mean, seeing the light from, you see the little particles floating around and stuff, or when you see images, you know, when people are in a movie theater, you know, and you see that cone of light coming out, it's the same deal here. Okay, so everybody get the idea of what's going on here. It does take, every time I add these features, it's taking time for it to render a bit more. And obviously it's, you know, it's cranked up a bit too much, a little bit too high, but now it really looks like, okay, a projector. I have a projector out there that you can't see that's projecting this image onto here. You know, like that projector is projecting the image onto the screen. Okay? Can be very, very effective. Is it almost done? It is done. There we go. Okay. Pretty cool. And it's all done with just a couple of clicks of the button and some buttons and tinkering with it. Let me show you another example. And I mentioned with, I'm going to turn off volumetric lighting because that takes too much time. But what I do want to do with the spotlight is I want to change the projection map. And I'm going to go back to one that I created, and this is in my original content in images, and you will see, where did I put it? I think I put it in my window demo. Images, window, this one. See this little map here? A little cross. It doesn't look like much, but imagine, if you would, light streaming through a window. And when it, you know, from the outdoors into a room. And what do you see? That the mullions of the window cast a shadow onto anything inside the room. So I'm going to go ahead and open that up. And we're going to render this again. And now notice, doesn't it look like the light is streaming through a window? If you had other vertical stripes or horizontal, it would look like Venetian blinds. You know, you can create soft edges, hard edges, it's up to you. And just something as simple as this, look at how dramatically it's changing the overall look and feel of it. Okay, rather than just use the simple distant light. Pretty nifty. Okay, so now what happens if we change the light again? So this time with lights here, I'm going to go ahead and change light properties. Instead of spotlight, I'm going to use a linear light. Notice with linear light, you don't have volumetric lighting available anymore. It's only with spotlights. So that's why spotlights, you might have to use them in combination with other lights. But now what I want you to see is the difference in shadows, starting with the linear lights. So I'm going to go ahead and render this again. It's much softer. And notice how the edges of the shadows are really not hard-edged anymore. They're still hard, but they're softer than what we had experienced before. Whoops, let me take it one back even further than that. See how crisp these are? And when I come all the way down to here, see how they're softening, especially along the edges here, especially as the shadows move away from the objects. In the real world, this is what you would see. The closer a shadow is to the object itself, the edge is hard and crisp, and as it falls away from the object, it gets softer. And that simulates that. So you start to get some very nice, smooth, soft shadows. Let's switch this again and look at light properties. And switch from linear light to area light, and you'll get even softer shadows with this. Let's go ahead and render again. Notice how soft these edges are now. Really nice, soft edges. See that? Not hard, crisp edges anymore. So it really depends on what kind of look you're going for. Okay, a couple more things. Also on light properties. And if I'm missing something, please let me know. I'm sure I'll forget something here. There is something called global illumination. And this is really equivalent to ambient light. If we click here, you'll see that there's, by default, they have a setting of 5% ambient light or global illumination. And what that means is, especially here, but not in outer space, but here on our planet, is that we have windows here, but the windows go out to a closed room. There are no windows to the outside. And we're pretty far away from everything. But if we were to turn off the lights here, turn off the lights there, turn off the lights there, and you were to sit here for a short time, you would actually be able to see. The only reason you can see is because of ambient light. Because of global illumination, that light from the outdoors would bounce back and forth and gradually make its way in here a little bit, just a subtle amount. Okay? And for most situations, it is necessary. If you were going to create a space scene, I would probably turn it off entirely. If you use too much of it, it tends to bleach everything out. So let me do, and to really make it look everything too bright and intense. So I'm going to turn it off and show you the difference, and then I'm going to crank it up and show you the difference. Sometimes cranking it up on an indoor scene is helpful, just a little bit, so that it will allow you to use fewer lights to light an entire room. But it can still, if you have the time to use the additional lights that you would need, it would be a better way to go. So I'm going to go ahead and render the frame. It's done rendering. Now let's compare it to the last one. See how there's a subtle little difference? It's darker without the ambient light. let's go back with a global illumination. Let's crank it up. Notice how even in OpenGL, it's really cranking everything up here. And it illuminates everything. It's like this light that exists everywhere. It doesn't come from a single source. So if I render this again, now notice how bright and intense everything is. Just bleached out. Now compare it. No pun intended, but like night and day. Huh? So you need to be really, really careful. You might want to do that for an effect, but I want you to be aware of that. You can also, and this is also really nice, for mood, if you want to set the mood, let's go ahead and crank this back to 5%, which was the default setting. But maybe we want to bathe everything in kind of a warm kind of yellow or amber kind of light, so that it warms everything up. So, you know, well, you could actually add it to the spotlight or whatever light that you want. You can change the color of it, or you can bathe the entire scene and change the ambient light a little bit. So you get, it will help in some instances by doing this, or in all instances, if you don't overuse it, it will help to unify everything, or to really to connect things color-wise. Very subtle, but let's switch from here back to here. Let's go ahead and crank this up a bit more, this ambient, so that you really see like a pink or a red or something. And I probably should, just so you can see this even more, let's turn this up to maybe 10% and render it again, so you can really see what I'm talking about. See, for example, what if you wanted to create a scene that maybe it was all black and white, but you wanted to create, it looks sort of like a sepia tone or something. So you'd, you know, bathe the whole thing in this amber light, or here it's all kind of a red or pinkish. Okay. Again, all done with lights. A couple more things that we can do. I'll leave this here. I'm going to close global illumination. We're going to go back here. Remember I said you could turn shadows on and off and objects. Here are all the objects in here, but I can exclude certain objects. So my first one, I believe, if I'm not correct, is the square. So I'm going to exclude the first object. I didn't name the layers or anything. I'm going to render it again and see what happens. Actually, I didn't. You know what that is? It's the floor. There we go. Let's abort that. So that's not such a good choice, but you'll see here. Now it excludes the square. It has nothing to do with shadows. It doesn't affect that object at all. And the reason you might want to do that is that what if I wanted a fill light for my sphere? So I put a light over here to the right. And I want to make sure that it affected only the sphere and not the cone and not the cube. Well, you would make sure that you excluded those other objects, as well as maybe the floor. By the same token, maybe I want, and we can control the shadows as well. Let's go back to objects. Let's have it exclude. Here, wait a minute. I want to look at shadows a minute here. No, just let's go ahead and exclude the square again. Let's see how it looks. Okay. So we can pick and choose what objects the light affects just by doing that. And that's all from light properties. Did everybody see where I got this? You select the light, that you have, and if you only have one light, under lights, click properties, that comes up, and we have our basic light settings. We have shadows if you want to control the shadow color. Okay, we also have objects that are contained in the scene that are affected by it that we can exclude or leave by default. We can control the global illumination, the color of the light, intensity, or the fall off. See, if I were to add that now and make this distance, let's make it linear, 1 meter. That's only one, it only has a distance, an effect of 1 meter away. Let's render this again and see what happens. See how dark everything is? This would be like trying to illuminate this, as I said, with a candle. It doesn't have much effect, does it? Let's change this to, crank it up to 2 meters, see what we get. Just keep doubling it and seeing what we get here. Notice how the light has a little bit more effect. It's hitting the corner here now. So now we're using the flashlight. Does that make sense? It has a little bit more power. It's all set to an 100% intensity. Now let's double this again. So for street lamps, for things like this in outdoor scenes especially, you might want to control fall off. So it doesn't illuminate everything equally close as well as 100 yards away. You want to try to approximate what it actually does in the real world. See how it's having a little bit more of effect now. Let's do that one more time. Let's select 8 meters. So all different ways of controlling the lighting in your scene. And I mean, just subtle little changes like this, as I said, can have really dynamic, profound change appearance later on of what you're doing here. So one more thing that I wanted to show you. I'm going to go ahead and clear the scene again. And I'm going to go ahead and load the scene. And I want to go back to, I got to go back again. I don't want to go into tutorial. I'm going to go back into scenes. And I want classic content, scenes. Got to remember, is it benchmark? Radiosity? Sunset? No, what was it? I want to show, which is related to lighting later on, to sky generator. Did Chris show you that? Sky tracer. For outdoor scenes, it's pretty neat. It will automatically generate clouds and sunsets and stuff like that. Pretty nifty. It does take a while to render the first go around. That would be useful for another video. Benchmark character computer. I can never remember where it is. How about setup? No. Tutorial. Not there. Where was it? Features. Man. Is it blotchy? Light, yeah, it's under blotchy. Why there, I don't know. Here it is, it's light stage. And I'll open it up so you can get an idea of what this is. And it doesn't look like much when it's in here. But if we switch from camera view to perspective view, you can see what's going on here and see how complex it is. Here's this big dish that they've put on the stage. And again, there's an effective area in the middle here into which you can place your objects. And they have a very soft, subtle curve out here so it doesn't, there are no shadows cast, there are no harsh edges. Look at all the lights that they've created here. We have, again, an area light at the top. This is what area lights look like. Okay? So if we go back again, this is our area light. Okay? This is the top light. They have, here, even before that, let me, all right, here's our key light. An area light. Gives, again, a nice, soft, broad area for subtle shadows. But right underneath that, look at the spotlight. Okay? So this would be key light 2. So those two combined give a very different effect. We can turn one off and leave the other on, or you can do that to test it, see how things work. Then we have a fill light, which is the one to the side, and then we have a backlight. Now, you can turn these on and off as you wish, depending on what kinds of shadows or what kind of look you want. But this gives you, especially for product pieces, and this is something you might consider doing for your toy. So you don't have to worry about the lighting, and you want it to look like it's in a photographer's studio, desktop, desktop situation where they've set up this ideal shot for your product and make it look really dynamic. A product shot that you would see in an ad. You could go ahead and bring your object in here. Okay? So I wanted to show you that. Now, if we were to go ahead and render this, it's not going to look like much. I could go ahead here and render frame. It's just going to look like a big white dish. But it's pretty evenly lit. You know, no shadows or anything. Don't see any seams. It changes tone a little bit here, where the right in here, where the curve is. But when you bring your objects in here, and you can adjust the scale accordingly, you have a pretty good lighting setup for you already, if you wish. And I don't mind if you use it and go back and tweak it and tinker with it, but you have something by default to work with. Okay? Everybody said, is there anything that I didn't cover that Chris did that you guys would like reviewed?
You mentioned the angle for the spotlight, the cone angle?
Ideal is generally 45 degrees, I would think.
But it won't look effective if you set it too wide or...
Huh? Oh, you mean when, I see what you're saying, that if you, okay, if we were to select the spotlight, or in this particular case, it was second one, you can change the cone angle. You're right, I didn't talk about that. I talked about the spotlight soft edge, but you can also control the angle of it. So if you want a really tight spotlight, you can make it very narrow, and it affects just a little tiny area. You'll see that in galleries a lot. You'll see it in theatrical lighting where it affects this light that's a long distance away, but that little cone, if it's so narrow and at that great distance, you know, it only illuminates a head or something, and that's it. And yet if you increase the angle of it, the cone gets wider. Does everybody understand that? That's all that is that you can adjust the cone, you know, how big or broad or how narrow that cone is for the spotlight. And that's just by dialing that and making the spotlight cone angle greater or less. And again, it's up to you. It's up to the particular situation. Leave it 30 degrees by default. You know, use the default settings. I don't think that's a bad way to start with most of these. See what the default setting is. See how it looks. And then if it seems to be overkill, dial it back, or, you know, and then if it's not enough, then increase it and try to change maybe 1 or 2 variables at a time. If you try to change more than that, you're not going to know what, if it doesn't work, what's going wrong. Okay. So that's sort of lighting in a nutshell. And I hope that you will use something in addition to, or maybe other than, a distant light, depending on what your toy is. I mean, I've had students do, you know, toy airplanes, but then when I showed everybody how to use Sky Tracer, they wanted the toy airplane to look like it was out of doors in the clouds and everything. And that was pretty cool. So that was a different, you know, kind of lighting situation, so you wouldn't need to do something like this. It's a little bit different. So I said, you know what, I said I was going to, in my This Week in Class, that I was going to do, start advanced modeling techniques, Boolean modeling and things like that on Wednesday. Maybe I'll do Sky Tracer instead, since it's related to lighting and really kind of get it done with. And it might be something, depending on the toy that you're doing, that you might want to use. It's really pretty amazing, just to let you know. And it's been around, many of these features, as long as computer or 3D modeling has been around. Is that, for example, because 3D modeling is used a lot in architecture, and one of the examples that I used that where it's used in architectural design is that a client will want to see, before the building is under construction, what it's going to look like in the context of where it's going to be built. So what they'll do is they'll take a photograph of the street or wherever the site is where this building is going to go. You make note of the location, you make note of the day, the time, the lighting conditions, okay? And then you go back into your studio, into the studio, and you start to build that street in 3D. And you can use that photograph actually, and we can create compositing techniques to mask out some of it and to place the building actually in that photograph, the 3D modeling of it. But to make it look believable, and this is done in film all the time now, and the best, when it's done really well, you can't tell the difference, obviously, is that you need to match in 3D modeling the lighting that exists outdoors when you took the photograph, don't you? Well, you can go in Sky Tracer and you can put in all those settings. You use a distant light and you can say, I'm in Los Angeles. It happens to be March 9th, 2009. And it's at this time of day, and it's these conditions, ta-da, this is what the light's going to look like. And it will pretty much match what you have in the photograph. You can go forwards and backwards in time, too. So what if you wanted to do, and this is done all the time, too, for archaeological recreations, Stonehenge. What if you wanted to know, thousands of years ago, what did it look like when the sun was rising above in a particular location at Stonehenge? Because they know that that's kind of, this astrological construct that they built that is aligned with the stars and the sun and the moon and everything, to see what that would look like. And you can do that. You can say, okay, I want this 2000 BC, this particular, I want it the summer solstice, the winter, and it will give you that exact setting. It's pretty amazing. It's really pretty nifty what to do. Okay? So we'll do that on Wednesday instead. That will be a good one. You can see, and there's a lot of presets for Sky Tracer. For sunsets, for evening scenes, moonlit, all kinds of stuff that you can go in and tinker with. So that would be something that we'll can work with too. Okay, so continue working on your finishing up Reboot if you haven't turned that in, and if you have, then you should be working on your toy.